The Reform Acts, exploring the key provisions and impact of electoral system reform in Britain. Presentation overview, context and origins of the Reform Acts. We will explore the political and social pressures that led to the introduction of the Reform Acts and delve into the historical context and origins of these pivotal pieces of legislation. Provisions and impact of each act. We'll examine the key provisions of each Reform Act and their impact on the electorate, exploring the changes and reforms that each act brought about in British political and social history. Legacy and significance of the Reform Acts. We'll discuss the legacy of the Reform Acts and their significance in British parliamentary history, exploring how these acts have shaped and influenced the political landscape of Britain to this day. The Great Reform Act of 1832. Context and origins. The Great Reform Act of 1832 was a response to growing public demand for parliamentary reform in Britain. It aimed to address the issue of rotten boroughs and expand the franchise to the middle class. Key provisions. The Great Reform Act of 1832 abolished rotten boroughs and redistributed their seats to more populous areas. It also expanded the franchise and removed property qualifications for voters. Origins and context. Electoral system. The Great Reform Act was introduced in response to widespread public dissatisfaction with the electoral system in Britain. The existing system was seen as corrupt and undemocratic, and the act was intended to make the system more fair and representative. Urbanization. The rise of urbanization and the growth of cities played a significant role in the development of the Great Reform Act. As cities grew in size and importance, there was a growing demand for political representation and a more democratic system of government. Middle class. The growth of the middle class in Britain also played an important role in the development of the Great Reform Act. As the middle class became more influential and politically aware, there was a growing demand for political representation and reform. Key provisions. Expansion of franchise. The Great Reform Act expanded the franchise to male property owners, significantly increasing the number of eligible voters and paving the way for further electoral reform in Britain. Abolition of rotten boroughs. The Great Reform Act abolished rotten boroughs, which were constituencies with very small populations that were controlled by wealthy landowners and often had more members of parliament than larger constituencies. The Second Reform Act of 1867. Political and social pressures. Second Reform Act of 1867 was introduced to expand the franchise to the working class due to political and social pressures. Various groups and individuals had been calling for electoral reform for years, culminating in this landmark legislation. Expansion of the franchise. Second Reform Act of 1867 expanded the franchise even further, particularly to the working class. This expanded access to the vote and helped to create a more representative government. Pressure for reform, electoral reform, and Chartists. The mid-19th century saw a growing pressure for electoral reform, particularly from working class movements such as the Chartists. Political and social context. We will explore the political and social context that led to the introduction of the Second Reform Act, including the influence of working class movements and the changing attitudes towards political representation. Key provisions. Second Reform Act. The Second Reform Act of 1867 extended voting rights to many working class men in Britain, but still excluded women and the urban poor. It was a major step in the expansion of democratic rights. Impact on electorate. The Second Reform Act led to a significant expansion of the electorate in Britain, giving many working class men the right to vote for the first time. This had a profound impact on the political landscape of the country. The Third Reform Act of 1884. Expansion of the franchise. The Third Reform Act of 1884 was introduced to further expand the franchise and address remaining inequalities in the electoral system. The act extended voting rights to rural agricultural workers and urban skilled workers. Political and social pressures. The Third Reform Act of 1884 was a response to political and social pressures to address electoral inequality and ensure a more representative democracy. The act was passed after years of political agitation and demonstrations. Expansion of the franchise. The Third Reform Act. The Third Reform Act of 1884 was a significant milestone in the expansion of the franchise in Britain. It extended the right to vote to almost all adult males, regardless of property ownership. Impact on the electorate. The expansion of the franchise greatly increased the size of the electorate in Britain, giving more people a voice in the political process. Impact on the political landscape. The expansion of the franchise had a significant impact on the political landscape of Britain, leading to the emergence of new political parties and the rise of working class representation. Impact on the electorate. Expansion of franchise. The Reform Act expanded the franchise and gave more people the right to vote, creating a more representative and democratic political system in Britain. Legacy of Reform Acts. The legacy of the Reform Acts continues to shape British parliamentary history, setting the stage for future political reforms and movements. Conclusion. Electoral system reform. The Reform Acts were a series of parliamentary acts that aimed to reform the electoral system in Britain, expanding the franchise and creating a more representative and democratic political system. Legacy of Reform Acts. The legacy of the Reform Acts is still felt today, and they remain a significant movement in Britain parliamentary history. Thank you.